In this documentary, we will teach you why the U.S. codebreakers were essential to the Battle of Midway. Now let's begin.
The Battle of Midway began on June 4th, 1942, amidst World War II, and it lasted for 3 days. It started when the Japanese fleet attacked Midway, but due to the efforts of Joe Rochefort and his group of U.S. codebreakers, they intercepted the Japanese plans, and the U.S. Navy made a counterstrike against the Japanese fleet.
The Battle of Midway played a huge part in World War II. Long before this attack on Midway Atoll, World War II began, which was a war when the Japanese and Germans felt the need to take over the world. One of the reasons Japan attacked the island was because they believed establishing dominance in the Pacific would give them an edge on the war. Evidence from other attacks, such as the Battle of Coral Sea, proved that they were in need of Pacific naval control for them to have a better chance of winning the war. One final reason is that Japan also mainly tried to chase down the aircraft carriers, the Yorktown, the Hornet, and the Enterprise. After the battle at Pearl Harbor, the Battle of Midway was supposed to be a surprise attack, but due to the great communication among the U.S. codebreakers, they were able to decrypt the code and be ready for the attack. The codebreaker that accomplished this task was Joe Rochefort. At the age of 42, he was awarded the Navy Distinguished Service Medal, Presidential Medal of Freedom. The way you can obtain this medal is for a special, memorable contribute to your country. Then Vice Admiral Isoroku of Japan deployed his troops on Midway.
Isoroku Yamamoto sent Vice Admiral Nakumo from the north to the island, and they were ready for the attack. Then the occupation force was sent to the island by Vice Admiral Kakando. Their job was to capture and occupy the island. Finally, Yamamoto went to the island with his fleet to defend the island from counterattacks. Due to the efforts of American codebreakers led by Joe Rochefort and his group, they were able to break into the Japanese code and decipher it. The American fleet consisted of 3 carriers consisting of the Enterprise, Yorktown, and the Hornet, holding B-17 dive bombers and torpedo bombers. Some of the B-17 planes were sent to search the area for the Japanese fleet. One of the pilots found Japanese's 4 carriers, 4 destroyers, and many of the Japanese planes heading towards Midway. Many American planes were sent to destroy the Japanese fleet. American pilots faced the Japanese pilots, and America was outnumbered. The Japanese pilots went for the islands. They hit Eastern Island first, then they hit the oil tanks at Sand Island. The U.S. sent many planes to the ships from all 3 of the American carriers, and they attacked Soryu first and scored 3 hits. The American bombers blew up Akagi, and then Yorktown was hit 2 times by Japanese, so everyone abandoned ship. Then dive bombers hit 4 direct hits on Haro, and that concluded the American versus Japanese Battle of Midway.
Isoroku Yamamoto knew that they lost the battle, so he decided to retreat. The U.S. decided to follow, but a storm delayed them from attacking. Once the storm cleared, the U.S. began their attack, sending in bombers and torpedo bombers. They sank many more Japanese ships. At Midway, the battleship Hammond had been sent to protect the sinking Yorktown. A Japanese submarine came by and shot both the Hammond and the Yorktown, nearly instantly sinking the Hammond. On the morning of the 7th, the USS Yorktown sank, marking the end of the battle. The Japanese had nearly 3,000 dead soldiers, while the U.S. had little over 300. We never would have won the war if we didn't win Midway. After we won Midway, Japan began to lose island after island. The U.S. pushed the Japanese back into Japan, neutralizing the majority of the threat in the Pacific. It's all because of the great communication of Joe Rochefort and his team that cracked the Japanese code. After the Battle of Midway, there was many battles in which the Japanese lost, such as the Battle of Eastern Solomons, Guadalcanal, and the Battle of Attu.
We think the U.S. codebreakers were a great topic idea for this year's NHD theme. The reason we think this was a great topic idea is because the U.S. codebreakers had to break into the Japanese planes and set a trap within it to stop them. If the U.S. codebreakers didn't decipher the Japanese code, then the U.S. naval group wouldn't be there to defend the island, and the Japanese would have probably taken over Midway.
Without the U.S. codebreakers, we might not even have our country up to this day. But because of this event, we were able to retake control of the island and minimize the threat of the Japanese army. A documentary on the Battle of Midway and why the codebreakers were so important to the Battle of Midway and why their communication was so key in the war.